It's with great pleasure that I want to introduce the introducer of our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Matthew McNabney, who is at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, professor, faculty member, done incredible things. And what is striking to so many of us who knew Paul Willging so well is that he not only worked with, but enjoyed the company of Paul Willging. Dr. McNabney, would you like to step forward, please?
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and honoring Paul Willging, a great friend of mine, as Mr. Carlson said, and it's a pleasure to catch up with his family, mine and Kirsten as well. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'll say a few words about Paul, who spent the last few years of his active career with us at Johns Hopkins. And he brought, as was mentioned, a great deal of wisdom from his work in Medicare, as well as other national organizations. But he loved, as you knew, those of you who knew him, he loved to talk about things he knew, but he also loved to listen to other people talk about what they knew. And I think that is what really contributed the most to our division. And he sparked a lot of important conversations that we hadn't touched on prior to his arrival. And I remember a particular project that he and I worked on where he bridged the knowledge gap between us at the university and the Health Facilities Association of Maryland, and brought us together, and we worked for a long time on a project looking at the way of looking at the needs of older adults in a comprehensive way that up to that point hadn't really been done that often, more in specific silos of care. So the concept of looking at what older adults need or would benefit from or would help lead more fulfilling lives across the spectrum of care services was a vision that Paul had, and he helped us a great deal in seeing that to come to life and contribute to that conversation. He also was very involved in our fellowship. I'm the fellowship program director, and he would beg and contribute dramatically to the teaching sessions with fellows. And they loved to hear his perspective on things, which he was, as you know, a very eloquent speaker, and he articulated things so well. An interesting story about how well he articulated things was one day I was waiting for the elevator. I had a soft drink in my hand, waiting for the elevator in the lobby of our building, and I see Paul walk in, and a very serious look on his face, and he says, "Can I ask you a question, Matt?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, Paul, you can ask me a question." He says, "Where on this campus did you get that Diet Dr. Pepper?" Nothing was above him asking in a very serious, articulate way. And he said, "That's my favorite drink, and I can't find it on this campus." But he was a great guy to work with. I actually now work in his office. I told his family I'm honored to work in the office that he had, and I feel his presence in many ways, both in what he wrote about and talked about, but also where he spent his time when he was with us. So it's been a pleasure to remember that. Moving on to the speaker from today, very appropriately, introducing Dr. Stephen Schimpff. As briefly mentioned already, quite a leader in many realms in medicine, having served as the Chief Executive Officer at University of Maryland Medical Center, and carrying what he learned and taught and built there into more general recommendations for healthy living. We'll hear about more today. He was also an author of more than 4 books since his role at the University of Maryland, so quite prolific. And for those of you who are interested, his training background started at Rutgers University, then to Yale University, and then on mostly in this area for training experiences at the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area. But it's a pleasure to hear what Dr. Schimpff is going to share with us on the topic of aging gracefully.
First, I need to check this. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. I have a soft voice, and he told me I have to be sure to talk loud enough. He can only turn it up so loud, but it sounds like it's okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Matt for that very nice introduction, and I want to thank the committee for deciding that they would like to invite me to do this, and I've been delighted. I met with Ron Carlson just about this time last year, and we've talked about this intermittently, had a number of lunches together, and it's always been really delightful, and he's a great mentor. You mentioned my new book a minute ago, and Ron actually read it, the manuscript, before it was published, and so I'll just say that because I really appreciate the fact he took a lot of time in going through the whole thing. Most people wouldn't do that. They'd read the they'd read the preface and say, well, whatever. But he read the whole thing and had a lot of comments all the way through. So I'm going to talk about aging gracefully. At least that's my title for it. And I'm 73 years old, I'll be 74 pretty soon. And so I think about it right now. I didn't think about it so much when I was 50, not even too much when I was 60. I certainly think about it now. I can tell that things aren't working just as well as they were before. They're pretty good. I'm standing up in front of you, I'm still talking. But I can tell that some things are slowly but surely changing. So what's the goal? So I've been thinking about this, and this is just a sort of simple goal that I put up here, is I would like to live a long time, and I bet most of you would too. But if I'm going to do it, I really would like to be healthy. It doesn't have to be perfect health, but I want it to be reasonably good health so I can enjoy and have some fun. So what I want to talk about today, we got to divide up into 5 topics. The first 2 are going to take up the bulk of the time, and then the next 3. But there is a normal aging process, and I think we need to go through that because then I want to get to, well, is it possible to slow that process down in a realistic way? Then I want to talk about how comprehensive primary care is really critical to that, although most of it's on our shoulders. And from primary care, take that into population health for a moment. And then, because here we are in Howard Community College, let's talk a little bit about careers in healthcare. So, it's like an old car. The old parts wear out. And we all know that. There is a steady process of loss. And it's about, for most of our organs, about 1% per year. Our organs have a huge redundancy. You know that, whether it's our lungs, our heart, kidneys, people can donate a kidney to someone else and only have 1 kidney left and they're fine. Why? Because we have this enormous redundancy. But we're losing about 1% per year of function. At some point, we can get to a place where there's going to be a functional problem due to that loss. So this is bone mineral density. I thought this was a good one to use. And if you look at the chart, is there a pointer in this thing? Does this have a pointer? Do we have a pointer? We don't have to have one. I can just talk. All right, I'll just talk. Look at the black line for men. The green line's women. So you see that when we're young, our bone mineral density is low. But it reaches a peak, this graph isn't quite right, but it reaches a peak around 18 to 20. It's a little higher for men than for women, again, on average. And then after around the age of 40, it starts to go down at about 1% per year. And you see I've got that gray line there to show that there's some point where you reach this functional, I'll call it the functional, or in this case, a fracture level, where if you fall down, you might break a hip, might break something in your back or an arm or wherever. So that point comes. Now you see that for women, first of all, they start lower. They go down at 1%, and then at menopause, it's a bigger drop, 2, 3, 4% for 3 or 4 years. Now that can be very significant, but then back to 1%. So from a fracture perspective, women have 3 things going against them. First one is they start lower, so they get there faster. Secondly, at menopause, it goes faster, so that gets them down faster. The third one is you all live longer than we do, so you have a longer span of time at that fracture threshold when you can have something happen. I don't mean that to be bad, it just is. Well, here's cognitive function. I found this chart in Science magazine. Just focus on the green line. Come back to the red line later. I'm sorry, the blue line. The blue line says the same kind of thing, that there is this decline. This isn't Alzheimer's. This is just We lose some of our memory, some of our cognitive abilities, just like everything else. The gray line shows that there's big, broad variation among people. So it's not like, everybody's on this one little line. But it's the same sort of thing. Over time, it changes. Here's another one, walking speed. Walking speed is, or gait speed, turns out to be a really interesting measure. So what you see there is kind of flat until about 60, and then it starts to go down. But it's really interesting because this walking speed isn't like a single organ like lung or heart or kidneys or bone mineral density. It's a combination of many, many factors that affect what our gait speed is. But what's interesting is, it's become clear, is that gait speed is a great measure for what might happen to us. In other words, if I have you just take a walk here, you can see in the chart, or the picture there, he's just watching her walk, says to her, I want you to just walk your normal rate of speed, times it, and you can look at that and differentiate, quite interestingly, if something bad's going to happen. Now this is going to be a little hard to see, but I think you can see it. Toward the left, there are people who are walking very slowly, toward the right, more briskly, and the incidence of death, as you can see, is much, much higher for people. And we're not referring to someone who's just, fallen down and broken a bone. That is not the issue. It's just what's my normal walking speed, whatever I think is about where I should be. So it's an interesting thing of how you can pull it all together there. So in aging, this is my separation. Others might separate things otherwise. But I like to think about impairments that occur, this old parts wear out thing, as opposed to diseases. There are certain age-prevalent diseases that are somewhat different. So some of the impairments, our vision starts to go a little bit. Sorry, I can't quite hear you. And that's pretty common as we get older. Our mobility, cognitive function, reflexes. Older people don't have as good reflexes. Maybe we shouldn't be driving quite so fast. Maybe we shouldn't be driving at all. So issues like that. On the other hand, there are chronic diseases, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, chronic lung disease. These have a much higher incidence as we get older. If you look at the graph, it goes zoop, right up like that. And for quite a few of these, diabetes included in that. So they occur when we're older, but when did they start? They didn't just start. The coronary artery disease, we know from autopsy studies of young people, there's plaque building up by the time we're 20. And it just keeps accelerating. And at some point, we may have that heart attack when we're 65 or so. And the same thing with lung cancer. The average person who gets lung cancer that's smoking related develops it at age 72. But we all know that that really started when you went out behind the garage and had that first cigarette. That was a long time ago. So these diseases manifest in older years, but it's not clear that they're all because of our age. It may just be because of enough time has elapsed for the disease to occur. These chronic illnesses, it turns out, are largely due to our lifestyles. Yeah, genetics is important, and environment's important, and we can't duck behind those. Mostly they're related to what we do with our life, starting when we're pretty young. So I put up what I believe are the 4 most important ones. There are others, but there's nutrition. Good nutrition is important, but we don't tend to have a good diet in this country. By the way, where's Kate? There you are. We had a really good lunch today, though. That was very healthy. Not only do we not eat good foods, processed foods, packaged foods, and so on, but we eat too much of it. We all know that. And then there's exercise. We don't exercise. When you come to Howard Community College, I bet most of you do what I did today, which was I knew which lot to go to. Let's see if I can find a space that's as close as possible. What we should do is take the space way at the far end and walk in. In other words, find ways to exercise a bit. So lack of exercise, chronic stress, we don't talk enough about chronic stress. Stress causes, acute stress, we all know if you see that beer truck barreling down the road at you, you know you can't fight it, so you got to run. Fight or flight, flight is what you got to do. And we can all feel it. The adrenaline level pops up, and we zoom, and our body really instantaneously does things to help us survive. Those same chemicals that are put out, not just adrenaline and cortisol, but a whole bunch of others, are put out, but at a low level if we're chronically stressed. And they're not good for us. But we can't see it, we can't feel it, we don't know it, but they're affecting our immune system, our bones, a whole series of things. I'll come back to some of them. It's a very, very important problem, and we are a society of chronic stress. Tobacco, of course, I don't think I need to say anything more about that. So then the question is, can we slow this aging process? We know it's a pretty steady thing of 1% a year, again, on average. And of course, the answer to the question, implied by my title in the beginning, is yes, we can slow it, but it's not a simple thing. But here's a quiz for you. I think this is kind of fun. I went to a conference about this time last year, and the dean of the public health school from Jefferson University was there, and he put this up, and so I've appropriated this from him. And this is the question: what % of Americans can answer yes to all 5 of these questions? Now, if you read them, I won't read them to you, but it's not a tough list. Well, don't smoke is don't smoke, but it just says you eat fruits and veggies. It doesn't say, you know, 5 a day or anything. It just says you eat fruits and veggies. And do you exercise? Well, give some number there. And an appropriate BMI doesn't really say BMI is, you know, height to weight ratio. It just says appropriate. So with that, I'd like you to all just shout out what you think, what % of Americans can say yes to all 5. 21%. 10%. 2%. Just one clue is that it can't be better than 80% because we know 20% of us still smoke. So the max you can do is 80%. Anybody? Some folks back there. 10%? 5%. Wow, you guys are really hard. Well, you did better than I thought most people would do. It's 3%. 3% will answer yes if they're honest. And these questions are easy. These are easy ones. There's not a lot of stuff around these questions. They're just easy. So I said it goes down at about 1% per year. Now, this is I made all these slides actually, but this one I made, and you have to know, I was fooling around on Excel. I don't know how to do it very well, but what I wanted to do was to start at 100% and say that's for, like, say, bone mineral density or whichever thing we're talking about. So we're going to start at 100% when you're 20 years old, because maybe it goes up until you get to 20. And then we're going to plateau for 20 years. So now we're at 40. And at 40, we're going to decline by 1% per year. So, you know, I went into Excel and I made a little formula, and this is how the graph came out. So this just shows you that if you live to 100, you're going to have about whatever this one's measuring. You start at 100%, you're going to have 55% left. That's basically what it shows. What if we could slow it down to only 0.75% per year? Or alternatively, speed it up to 1.25% per year. And those are the two graphs. So, you know, it's kind of like compound interest. You know, it just gets better over time. If you live long enough, it gets better. So if we could slow it to 0.75% per year, it's about 65 or so. I think it's 67% instead of 55%. And if we speed it up, of course, it's going to be down like around 50%. So it's to our advantage. But maybe at 40, we weren't thinking about it yet. I'm young, I'm immortal, you know, that's how we all are. I'll wait and do it later. Kind of like saving for retirement, you know, I'll wait till I earn some more money and then I'll put it aside. So it's the same thing here. But anyway, what if we waited till age 60, and I hope you can see that purple line there. At age 60, we're going to slow it down to 0.75%. And so, you know, it's not as good, but the point of this is it's never too late to start. You can always get some benefit from a start. And then the other one I want to show you is, but what if we could start out better? What's the value of starting out better? Remember I showed you the difference between men and women. Well, this just says if whatever this is, we could start a little better, it's going to be really very valuable to us. So with those things in mind, let's go back to bone mineral density. The most important thing to do, perhaps, is to tell our kids and our grandkids, get out there, eat a good diet, and get outside and exercise. And we don't do both of those very much in this society today. When I was a kid, the back door was opened and it was, get out, come back for dinner. This was after school. And we were just out doing stuff. Listen, you know, kids are inside. I worry about my own grandkids, that they're sitting there with little things in their hand doing this. Their thumbs are getting exercise, but not the rest of them. So that's where we can start. We want to start higher. The second thing is we want to try and slow it down a bit. So how can we slow it down? Well, it turns out that there are some adverse factors for bone mineral density, just keeping this example going. And one we just talked about, if you start low, you're going to get there faster. So get it up higher to start with. But here's chronic stress again. Who would have thought necessarily that some chemicals that you can't tell are out there doing stuff to you is actually going to have an impact on your bone mineral density, but it does. Protective factors, you're not going to be surprised by what I'm going to tell you, but protective factors are physically active and a good diet. We could talk later on if you want about what's a good diet. Actually, I should say just good nutrition. Diet implies something else, you know, you use some kind of fad, but we'll just talk about good nutrition. So those are the protective factors. So what about cognitive aging? The red line there was to make a point about it could go faster, or if you could slow it down, it could go slower. And again, it's within this wide degree of variation. So again, there are some protective factors and adverse factors. It won't surprise you to know that vascular factors affect our brains and can affect our cognitive function. Again, chronic stress, and the metabolic syndrome is related to, it's a precursor of diabetes, but again, it's chemicals in the blood that have an adverse effect. The positives are the same to start with, physically active. You say, what's that got to do with my brain? It just sits up there. But it has an enormous impact on our cognitive function, as does a good diet again. And then the other two things that are important, though, we need to be this needs to exercise too. So we need an intellectual challenge. So what's that? Well, you think of things like, I can learn how to play chess. That's too hard. I don't want to do that. How about I just read a good book? Well, that's probably not much of an intellectual challenge. It might be if you had a book club and you had to go and defend your perspective with some other people. Now you got to do some work. But mostly just reading isn't doing it. So we need an intellectual challenge of one sort or another. And we also need to be socially engaged. We're social animals. We are designed to be social, if you will. We need a social engagement thing. And in older people, frequently that's very hard. Frequently, they're isolated. Just to give you a quick example, a few years ago my wife fell. She was out walking and tripped on a crack in the sidewalk, went down head first, but hit her kneecap, her patella, broke it. You think, that's just a little bone, it's about this big. How could that be important? Well, it's important because you can't walk. And so she's in an immobilizer, and it was her right leg, so she can't drive, so she's stuck at home. We have a typical two-story house in the basement, so she couldn't go up. She could on her butt, I guess, but so she stuck to the first floor. Turns out we have a bedroom on our first floor, which is good. We have a laundry room on the first floor. The kitchen's there. So she could live on the first floor. But we lived in Columbia. Columbia is designed around a car. She couldn't drive. I could drive her places. That was not satisfying to her, you can be sure. Friends would come and visit, but not that often. She wasn't going to beg them to please come see me. They're off doing their own things. So she couldn't get out and do the things that she normally did. She found it to be very socially isolating. And that's an example of someone who's healthy. So think about someone who's older who can't do the things that they normally do. It's very important to have that social engagement. So there are 3 things we can do about aging, and they're all the same one. And you know, there are no pills. Now, if you want, when we get down to the question time, if you want to ask me about pills, we can talk about that. You may have read in the newspaper very recently that there's going to be a big study of metformin to maybe slow aging, and people talk about a number of other drugs. And you all know about I don't know if I pronounced it right, resveratrol, which is in red wine. That's a good way to do things, but you got to drink a lot of red wine to have the effect. So they're probably, at least right now, there's no pills, no fountain of youth. You just have to go and do it. We have to find ways to change our lifestyles, and that's the most important thing of all. I was talking just a couple days ago to someone who runs a business around wellness. He has a wellness company, and he goes into employers and helps them with their employees work on all these issues. And we were talking in this particular case about someone who was overweight. And he said, you know, the person who's overweight knows they're overweight. They know that it's not good. They know they want to lose weight. But he said, we can, you know, hit them over the head all day. He said, the most useful thing we can do is find out if there's another driver in there. And he said, that other driver is often a stress. And until we can deal with their stress in life, we can't deal with the weight. So it was a good lesson. All these things are tied together. But anyway, we do need to avoid tobacco. It's never too late to quit. There was a good study that came out a year or 2 ago that showed people who were smokers at, say, the age of 20 and then quit, those who were smokers but didn't quit, and there was like a 12-year difference in lifespan. 12-year difference in lifespan between those who smoked from 20 on and those who were smokers but stopped. On the other hand, if you quit, say at age 40, you didn't get all 12 years back, but you got 7 years back. So it's never too late again, but it's tough. Anybody who's been a smoker and tried to quit will tell you it was really, really hard. Reduce chronic stress. That's one of those things too. You say, oh, Schimpff, that's great for you to say, but yeah, it's really hard to do. I got to go to work. I got a nasty boss. Like, you know, all these different things. It's hard. Okay, it's hard, but it needs to be done. Nutritious diet, and then again, cognitive exercises and physical exercise. Physical exercise, talk about more in a minute, but we were talking at the luncheon before about these societies that are living long times. A whole number of them, you've probably heard of the blue zones. These isolated little areas where they don't have good health care, by the way, but folks live for, into their 90s, into their 100s, and healthy all the way. But they have a good diet. They walk everywhere. Their houses are close together. They walk to the store. They're up and down the hill. Everything that they need to do is usually done by walking to it. And it's all day long. So they're always moving their bodies. Our bodies were built to move. They weren't built to sit. More about cognition. I think that's enough about that. So another thing, this is not original by me. I heard this recently and I thought it was very apropos. Sitting is the new smoking. And we've done a wonderful job in this country, I think in the last 20 years or so, in getting smoking down. Still 20% smoke, and it's folks who are, kind of getting sucked into it. And people who can least afford cigarettes too, who are smoking. But here's what we need. Again, I won't read it to you. But, this implies, let's head over to the health club, 3 times a week, and let's do our weights. Much better, again, if we were active all the time, if we got our kids out all the time. And that's changed a lot because of what we do. We go to work now. It's a nice white-collar job. We sit in an office, we sit in front of a computer screen. There was a great article in the Wall Street Journal about 4 or 5 days ago based on some studies that showed if you're sitting in front of that computer, you ought to get up every 20 minutes. At a minimum, stand for 10, and within that 10 minutes, at a minimum 2 minutes, walk around. Do something else. Don't just stand there and talk to your neighbor. I put balance on here too. As we get older, our balance isn't as good. And again, if we're going to have bones that aren't as good, we don't want to fall down. So keeping our balance is important. I'm not going to give a lecture on nutrition. I just put these up to make 2 points. One is that veggies should take up 2/3 of our plate, or fruits and veggies should take up 2/3 of our plate. And meat, whether it's meat or fish, should take up no more than 1/3, and probably more like 1/4. The meat should be a condiment almost, not quite a condiment, and it should be good. You don't have to be a vegetarian, but we tend to think of, I know how I was brought up. We had a roast beef, and you got this big thing in the middle of the plate, and there were some potatoes over here and some green beans over here, but the meat was the thing. And if you didn't have meat, that meant you were poor. The folks who were poor got beans. Probably should have had a lot more beans and a lot less roast beef. The other thing about these pictures is color. Just a lot of different colors on the plate means you're getting a lot of different nutrients. Let me just go back here for a second. As we get older, we metabolize differently and we absorb differently. And so we need fewer calories because we're less active, but we need more nutrition. We need more good stuff. So we need a nutrient-dense diet. So that, again, implies the fact that we need a lot more vegetables and a lot less fat. A little fat's good. Personally, I'm big on McDonald's French fries, but I try and keep it at just a couple of times a year. That's because of my wife. I would probably go more often, but this is just all I'm going to say. There is an incredible mind-body connection between our mind and our body, and we all know that. It's becoming more and more apparent. We need to deal with our stress issues in life. So now I want to switch to primary care. It's probably too large a group to ask you to shout out, so I'm going to do it for you. But if I were to say, how would you define primary care? When I ask this question, I usually get answers like this. Oh, that's for the simple stuff. Or, well, it's if I get a sprained ankle, or if I have an earache, or maybe a sore throat, I'll go with the primary care doctor. There's a primary care doctor standing in the back of the audience who knows that that's not the right answer, but that's the answer people give. What is primary care? Here's my list. It could be added to or subtracted from, not subtracted from it, but certainly added to. First thing is, a primary care physician can take care of probably 95% of our health care needs. 95%. There are times when you got to go see a specialist, got to go to the hospital, got to go to the ER, but 95% of the time, the primary care physician can take care of it. But what that requires, number one, in my mind, is a relationship, a close relationship between you and the doc. And there are some reasons why that's not occurring the way it might right now. I'll come back to that in a second. But the relationship is so key in order to build trust. And if you can't have trust between you and your doc, it's hard to have real healing. So that all means time. And I'm going to come back to time in a minute. But if there is time, then that primary care physician can certainly deal with most of the episodic issues that occur in life, as the types I just mentioned before. And what I think people don't realize is primary care physicians are very well trained and experienced in dealing with chronic illness, heart failure, chronic diabetes with complications, chronic lung disease. They're quite capable. You don't need to go to the specialist, again, but if they have time to deal with it. Sometimes you do need to go to the specialist. So there's two ways to do that. I can say, Harry, I think it'd be good if you went to see the cardiologist. and here's the name of a couple of them, or I can call the cardiologist and say, Dr. So-and-so, I want to send Harry over to you, and here's why I'm sending him, here's what I know, here's what I'd like you to look for. That makes a huge difference. Now the doc knows why you're in the office. So frequently, specialists have a patient walk in, and they say, so tell me why you're here. Well, my doctor sent me, but no more information. That's not good. And what that means, of course, is that lots of testing gets done, because we don't know why you're here. So it's coordinating the care. We hear lots about care coordination, and that's kind of what it's about. Same thing if you have to be admitted to the hospital. When you come back out, that primary care physician needs to see you within 48 hours to be sure that all the issues of the discharge are being properly assessed. Absent that, there's going to be this readmission to the hospital, which you all hear about, that Medicare is so upset about. It's about 20% of older folks end up back in the hospital unexpectedly within 30 days. But now I get into the more fun part, and that's maintaining health and wellness. What we have in this country, in my opinion, is medical care, not health care, medical care. My boss always used to say to me at the University of Maryland Medical Center was, we're into disease and pestilence. That's true. That's what a hospital is for. A hospital's there to take care of you when you're sick. But in the community here, what we all need is wellness care. We need to stay well and need to be and stay healthy. So we need to look at chronic illnesses and reduce the risk factors, because that's so important. Chronic illnesses like the ones I've mentioned, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and so on, these account for 75 to 85% of all healthcare expenses. So if we can prevent them, that's fantastic. And secondly, if you develop them, if they can be treated in the primary care physician's office, that's very advantageous. And lastly, preventing acute illnesses with vaccines and the like. So I'm looking up there at the clock, and I'm just trying to check my time here. I believe that there's a crisis in primary care. I think most primary care physicians would agree with me, in which they say, I'm in a rat race. What I have to do is I have to see about twice as many patients today as I did about 20 years ago per day in order to earn the same income, inflation adjusted. Well, if I'm seeing twice as many patients, it's pretty obvious what that means. It means much shorter visits. So you can just take 24 patients per day, divide that by 8, and it's going to be 15 or 20-minute visits, but a 15-minute visit means maybe 8 to 10 minutes at most of face time with the doctor. That's okay if I walk in and say, hey, doc, I got a headache, I've got a fever, I got this rash on my chest, which is spreading out, and it's kind of red, and oh, by the way, about 5 days ago, I had a tick there. Okay, so my primary care doc will say, oh, I think you have Lyme disease, and here's your doxycycline. Remember to take it for as long as I told you, and get out of here. Call me if there's a problem. Well, you can do that in 8 to 10 minutes, and I don't mean to be trivial about it. But let's assume now that I've got that heart disease, or heart failure, chronic lung disease, and diabetes with some complications. And I'm on 7 prescription medications, and now I come into you with a new problem, or an exacerbation of one of those old problems. 10 minutes doesn't do it. So we need somehow for the doc to have more time. If they don't have time, there's something that tends to happen. I can't figure it out in the amount of time that's available. Off to the cardiologist, off to the gastroenterologist, et cetera. And that happens. There's some good studies that show that in the last 10 or so years, referrals to specialists have doubled. And they don't need to. And they do it because kind of have to. What this means is costs go up. Costs go up, and the patient-doctor relationship goes down. Doctors are frustrated, patients are frustrated, unsatisfied. So it is, as I said, I think it's a crisis. This is just to show that point about earning the same income but seeing twice as many patients. It's a little more striking graphically like that. So I'm going to use, I've written a book, you probably saw it when you came in, about this issue, and I interviewed people across the country, primary care docs. And I'm going to give 2 interviews quickly from docs here in town. Since I didn't ask them if I could use their names, I just put, in this case, Dr. 1. So Dr. 1 is very well known here in Howard County. Went to Yale Medical School, went to Harvard for a internship, residency, and training in gerontology. Came back here, has been in practice for about 20 years, and told me, this is about 4 or 5 years ago now, 4 years ago, I am just overwhelmed. It's like pushing this ball up the hill, and it never goes up the hill. I'm absolutely, totally overwhelmed. I go home, and I'm exhausted. I come back the next morning, and I'm tired. I'm not spending the time with my patients that I want. I don't feel fulfilled anymore. That's the essence of it. So there's something called direct primary care. And it goes by a bunch of different names: retainer-based, membership, concierge. Concierge has a bad connotation because people think of that as for the, the 1%, the elite. It's too expensive. Sometimes it is, but mostly direct primary care is not expensive. And it turns out there's more than a number, quite a few physicians in town now that have direct primary care practices. Called direct because they say, I don't want the money from the insurance company anymore. I'm going to bill you directly. You pay me. And now we have a direct relationship, kind of like you do with your lawyer, your accountant, your architect, your plumber, or whoever. What the average primary care physician has maybe 3,000 patients, and this usually means reducing it down to around 500 to maybe 800, but around 500. With 500 patients, the doc can now say, you can call me today, and I'll see you today or certainly tomorrow. And we'll take as much time as you need, because all I'm going to see is maybe 8 to 10 patients a day, maybe fewer. I have time to listen. I can actually talk to you. We have time. There's time for an extensive annual evaluation, which means we can begin to deal with those issues of preventive care and wellness care. And by the way, here's my cell phone number. You can call me 24/7. It's okay. Don't call me at night if you don't need to, and if you do need to and you're starting to feel sick at 8 o'clock at night, call me at 8, don't wait till 2 in the morning. And as I said before, the patient, not the insurer, is now the customer. And I think that's an important point. Today, the doctor has the insurance as their customer. Why do I say that? Because the insurer will determine if the doctor gets paid and how much the doctor gets paid. That's not a good arrangement. So, but you have to pay for this. I mean, you do have to pay for it. And so there's either an annual or a monthly retainer. Or another approach is, like going back to the old days, some with direct primary care just have you pay kind of like an hourly basis per visit. So now I go back to Dr. 1 here, who did switch, and in an interview later on said to me, I can't believe how negative I was before. Now I know I'm giving much better care, and I feel good when I go home. I'm refreshed when I come back in the morning. I'm excited about taking care of people, and I know most important of all is that they're getting good quality care. So here's another one who many of you would also know, well known here in the community, who switched to direct primary care maybe 5 years ago. And after he'd been doing it for a year or so, I asked him how it was going. He said, I'm working just as hard as I ever did, as many hours. He said, but the care I'm giving is so much different. And if somebody came in the old days with a high cholesterol, I'd write out a little prescription for Lipitor and say, here, go take this, and come back in 3 months, we'll check your levels. So now, that's not the way it is. Now, we're going to have a talk. We're going to talk about your diet, your nutrition, your stresses, your family, all the other things that might be having an impact on your cholesterol. I still may have to give out the Lipitor, but it's going to be done in a much different perspective. He also told me a story of a patient of his that he'd known for a long time and came in for a minor issue. And they just got talking because there was time. And he noticed something about her speech. It wasn't quite right. He said it's hard for me to describe. He said, but I just knew there was something wrong. He did a very thorough history, very thorough exam. He did a complete neurologic exam, couldn't find a thing. He said, something's wrong. I'm going to get an MRI of her brain. So he ordered it, and of course the insurance company said, no, can't have that. Negative history, negative exam, why should we, spend all that money for an MRI? So he worked his way up in the insurance company and finally got to the medical director, and he just was a pest. It took him about an hour. And eventually, probably, as he said to me, probably they just wanted to get rid of me. They said, "Oh, okay, go do it." She had a primary lymphoma of the brain. Small still. Curable. It wouldn't have been if it waited till later on. So the point of the story is he had time, number one, to talk to her and pick up something. And number two, he had the time, he said, "I'm going to get this damn MRI. And I'm not going to be, stopped by the system." So he had to have the time to do it. So it's more time per patient. It costs more. There's no question. That costs more. That jacks up the cost of primary care, which, by the way, today is about 5% of total cost of care. So maybe it jacks it up from 5 to 7%, even 8%. But in return, there's better health, better wellness, better quality of care. The patient's more satisfied, the doctor's less frustrated. I think it's a win-win. And so I should be honest and say that my doctor switched, and when he did, I said something that I won't repeat. It sort of was like, "I'm pissed off, I got to pay extra, I'm on Medicare. Why should, Medicare pays my bills. Why should I pay him this extra money?" But I did, and I'm really glad I did because I get more time. So now's the advertisement time. Ron encouraged me to give this advertisement, so I'm going to do it. Spent much of the last 3 years researching this book called Fixing the Primary Care Crisis. And I have to go over here to even read it myself. It says, "Reclaiming the patient-physician relationship and returning healthcare decisions to you and your doctor." I bought some copies. They're out there. If you'd like one, it's $10. If you want to go to Amazon, it's $15. On the other hand, if you go to Amazon, they'll deliver it to your house. You can use your credit card. But here, you got to leave me $10. And I'll be glad to sign it if you want. But that's all. That's the end. My recommendation is you need to have a primary care doc. You need one that can give you the time you need, and it costs more, but you get more. That takes me to population health. How did I get from there to there? Well, in my mind, there are many ways to think about population health. It's kind of the new mantra. It's been around for years, but suddenly everybody's talking about population health. Hospitals in this state are being pushed to deal with it. Health departments have always been dealing with it. Others are. I think that a great place to start is with the primary care physicians. They've got the patients, they're seeing them regularly. And so remember that that primary care doc usually has around 2,500 to 3,000 patients. And I've just told you I think that's too many, but I'm going to use that number anyway. And the issue is, can we reach those patients proactively? Because we know on average, these numbers are just averages, that of that 2,500, maybe 511 have an elevated cholesterol or triglyceride. We know that a whole bunch of them have hypertension, arthritis, anxiety. I don't have chronic stress in there because nobody seems to know how to measure that. Asthma, diabetes, and the list goes on. So they're there. So what if that doctor had the time, again, to actually deal in a very proactive way, not react. Today we're reactive. You call me and come in to see me because I got something that's wrong. But on the other hand, if I, and not just me, it really is, it's a team. It's a team-based thing, not a Lone Ranger type thing. It's a team. And it would require some information technology and other approaches. But if I could get to you throughout the course of the year in a proactive way to deal with some of the issues, we also know that same 2,500 has risk factors. Probably 2,400 of them need to see a nutritionist. It's just the way it is. And we know that a third of us are overweight and a third are obese, so that's around 1,600 need to deal with their weight. And we've already talked about that isn't quite so simple. Physical activity issues, stress, smoking, we can go down the list. The point of it, again, if we could deal with these things proactively, we might be able to prevent some chronic illnesses, make life better, and in our older years, be healthy and well rather than dealing with chronic illnesses. Just last thing, I'll do it in just a minute. And we're here at Howard Community College. We're talking about health careers, and 3 students were just recognized and honored for their work and what they're going to do. If you're thinking about the future, we already know that 17% of the gross domestic product goes to healthcare. So there's money there. That's always an important thing. There's money there. The other thing is that we're getting older as a society. We're getting older. This one graphic just shows it. The baby boomers are coming. There used to be, there was a guy named Willie Sutton years ago who was a bank robber. Very good bank robber. And he was interrogated one time, and somebody said to him, "Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks?" He looked at his interrogator sort of incredulously and said, "That's where the money is." So I would say to you, that's where the money is, but it's also where the fun is. I personally, I know I've talked a lot from the perspective of a physician. I am one, so that's the way I am. I don't deny it or excuse it. But there are many, many aspects of healthcare other than being a doc. And you know them. I've listed some here. There's just so many areas, and some of them you might not think about. Personal trainer. That's very important to health today. Nutritionists, social workers. One that I didn't think to put on there, and I started thinking about it last night, is health coaching. Remember I mentioned before about the person who's overweight, and you can try and beat them over the head, but what they need, or at least can be helpful, is a health coach who has the understanding of how to deal with set goals. The goal may not be to lose weight. The goal may be something totally different that needs to be done now before we can ever begin to address the being overweight. So anyway, there's loads of areas to go into. It's where the action is, and I would encourage you to think about healthcare as your profession. No matter where you go in healthcare, there's something that's interesting, exciting. Sure, there's lots of frustrations. You hear that all the time. "Oh, I wouldn't send my kid to healthcare anymore." No, that's wrong. It is a very exciting place to be. I could repeat all this to you. I think I won't. It's getting late. But we can slow the physical decline and the onset of chronic illness with some simple steps, but they're not simple. They're simple steps, but they're not simple. We can slow the cognitive decline, again, with physical activity, good nutrition, but then we have to get our brains to be socially engaged and intellectually challenged. I'm not going to repeat what I just said about comprehensive primary care and population health, but I do want to thank some people that have helped me over the last few years in thinking about this topic. One is Dr. Matthew Narrett. He is the chief physician for the Erickson Retirement 16 communities. One is Dr. Andy Lazarus, who's standing up in the back, I noticed. He's a private gerontologist. He has a private practice in mostly gerontology here in town. Stephen Gambert is a professor at the University of Maryland. He's a gerontologist. And Jack, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Goralnik, was for years at the National Institutes of Aging. And each of them have given me some clues and some things. I think you probably can't read this, but I listed some books up here that are kind of interesting. One is called Old is the New Young. Dr. Narrett is one of the authors of that one. There's one called Defy Aging, which kind of gets at some of the social issues, the social engagement issues related to aging. The relaxation response has been around for a while by Herbert Benson, a cardiologist in Boston. And it's a terrific book in thinking about chronic stress and dealing with it. And I listed my 2 books because I wanted to do that. So finally, some contact information. I won't answer questions about personal medical problems, but anything else I'll try and respond, and you're welcome to call me at any time. And thank you. Yes?
Talk about fixing primary care crisis. And you also talk about concierge physicians, and they see significantly fewer people per physician. So I'm interested it, they're going to see less. How are we going to fix the primary care crisis?
Let me just repeat his question. So if a doctor has a practice of 2,500, contracts it down to 500, first of all, there's 2,000 that have to go somewhere else. And isn't that just making the crisis worse? Because we're seeing fewer patients. And I'll just throw out also the question that goes with that often is, isn't that patient abandonment? And you didn't ask that, but some people do. So my response to it is this, and I'm going to do it with some anecdotes. Imagine a physician who has a heart attack, is out of commission for 6 weeks, comes back to work and says, I got to work part-time. I got to reduce to 50% time. I can't do it anymore. Everybody would say, oh, I'm sorry to see Dr. So-and-so cut back like that. I'm sorry about what happened to him, but I understand. If Dr. So-and-so died, all his patients have to go somewhere else. And everybody would say, boy, that's really bad. I'm sorry, but I understand. I think what we have to begin to do is to see what the two docs whose examples I gave, who said, I'm dying. I'm not giving the care I need to give. I got to cut it back. But yes, there's a shortage. That increases the shortage. What I believe is, of course, this won't happen like this. More and more, I'm getting it aside. I'm not answering this question. I'm going to. There was a survey that just came out in the last week or so. It showed that of privately practicing primary care physicians, 43% are thinking about converting their practices. That's up from about 10% just a couple of years ago. So it tells you that people are anxious. Anyway, it won't all happen at once, even if everybody says I'm going to do it. The positive part of it, though, is medical students. Medical students, I believe, are going to say, oh, you mean I can have a satisfying practice, earn a decent income, pay off my school debts, and not be in this rat race anymore. And so I think that would, backfill that over time. But it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. But that's my answer to that question.
I noticed that one of the behaviors that you didn't have up on there is sleep. We hear oftentimes people should have 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Is sleep overrated? Perhaps you could do some chronic stress of mine if you said you didn't have to sleep 7 or 8 hours.
Yeah, so is sleep important? Something I didn't talk about. Yes, sleep's very important. And it needs to be restful sleep. We need to be able to wake up. There's a little cognitive decline here. I can't think of the word I want, but you need to wake up feeling good. And so it needs to be good sleep, restful sleep. It is important, and it affects our stress level. If we don't get enough sleep, it affects our work level. So yeah, we need to sleep well. Anybody else?
Where does the leadership come from in the county if we're saying, here are some things that we really would like to do, we need to do, where and how do you, what do you recommend we do?
Well, that's a really tough question. I'm a personal believer that things that are going to be innovative start from the bottom up. So to use the direct primary care example, I noticed that the insurance companies aren't, promoting it. It's the docs who have said, I got to make a change. They're the ones who are doing it. And then what's happening is the employers are seeing it and saying, oh gosh, I'm spending all this money for health care for my employees. Of course, I'm offloading some of it, maybe 25% or so to my employee, but there's all this money being spent, and it gets worse every year. If I could get them better health care, not just medical care, I could save some money, and I'd have a healthier employee base, and they'd come to work more, and all sorts of things that would be better. So what's happening, not in huge numbers yet, but is that employers are saying, I'm going to, you're going to have your choice of the PPO, the HMO, the this, that, and the other thing, or you can have a high deductible policy in which the employer will pay the retainer for the physician, and you'll get this much better care. And I keep using the term the physician. It's a team. It's got to be a team. Otherwise, we're not talking about the same thing. So I think that's the second thing. And, you know, here in Maryland, Blue Cross started a program 3 or 4 years ago. They call it their medical home model, in which they said, there's all these folks that have chronic illnesses, and we know they need more attention and more time and care coordination. So what we'll do is we'll put an extra 12%, so this is now the under 65 people, commercial insurance, we'll put an extra 12% if you docs sign up. Now I won't go through all the details of it, but if you docs sign up, we'll give you 12% more for each patient you see than what we would normally give you. And for each patient who has chronic illnesses, if you will fill out a care plan, which goes on the electronic medical record, we will give you an extra $200 for that, and we will supply a nurse who's trained to help you with the care coordination. And now 3 years into the program, what they found is that it works. It works very well. So that doctors are spending, presumably, more time with the patients who need it, and they're getting better care coordination. And so those with chronic illnesses are not seeing specialists as often, not being admitted to the hospital as often, not going to ER as often. So total costs are coming down, even though Blue Cross is paying more for primary care. So I think, you know, I think the leadership comes in lots of different places, not one place.
Thank you very, very much. That was wonderful. And for those of you who would like to hear this again or to pass the information along to others who were not able to be here today, this will be on our website, the Paul Willging Endowment website. Go to it. We'll have it up in a few days. I also want to mention that the county spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in putting together a kind of blueprint and plan for addressing the problems of the older adult. That's been recently released by the Department of Citizen Services. There's some really very provoking information in there. I think organizations and individuals who would like to explore this a little bit further, Phyllis Madachi tells me there's going to be ample opportunity. Where are you, Phyllis? For individuals and organizations to rally behind this and to see what kinds of things might be done in the short term and long term. So take a look at that, and you'll be hearing more about that, I'm sure. It's been a wonderful day. I want to thank everybody who's contributed so much to our work in making the afternoon what I think is successful. Special thanks to the Howard Community College, Kate and the staff. Again, we couldn't do this without you, of course. To the staff who've been very helpful. We've had a lot of in-kind support from the Lorien Health System and from even Turf Valley Hotel and Conference Center. Had some, did I hear an applause? Yes, indeed. They've been very, very wonderful, very generous, as has Stonebridge Advisors. Mike Ward, who is a member of our executive committee. Mike, I don't know if you're still here or not, but we thank you. And this is my opportunity to give a special thanks to members of the executive committee. And so to be sure that I did not forget any of the members, I've written them down. Mike, of course, and Mary Ellen Duncan. Where are you, Mary Ellen? Are you still here, or did you slip out? There you are. Thank you. Good. Phyllis Madachi, you heard before. Mike Nolan. Mike is Deputy Director of the Hilltop Institute at UMBC. Marty Wasserman, who had to leave to take an important medical call, I suspect. Bruce Leff, who is a longtime founding member of the executive committee from Hopkins, and myself. So we thank you very much, executive committee. A little round of applause for those who have contributed so much. Thank you. We're going to have a reception now in the atrium, and please come forward. And you don't have to buy the book, Stephen, although if you'd like to. So enjoy, and thank you very much.